Right. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Amy Snyder from the Connect and Communicate Series Planning Committee. Thank you for joining us for this presentation, Setting the Stage for Civic-Minded Education, Collaborative Approaches to Instruction. This discussion will be recorded and it will be made available to Pennsylvania Library Association College and Research Division members through the PALA website, as well as sent to registrants and available on the CRD blog. For this discussion, you will only need a headset or speakers. We encourage you to ask questions in the chat box at the bottom right. We will hold questions until the end, but as you think of them, you're welcome to add them to the chat box. We'll also do our best to assist participants with technical issues, so please post those issues in the chat box as well. This session is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Library Association College and Research Division's Connect and Communicate series. I'd like to thank the CRD board for supporting the Connect and Communicate initiative and the other Connect and Communicate Planning Committee members, Erin Burns, Ronali Sioko, Sarah Pike, and Diane Porterfield. Please contact any one of our team for information about becoming a PALA member. And finally, I would like to thank and introduce our panelists for today's event. Jen Bonnet is a foster parent, educator, baker, although she has miles to go before becoming a skilled as a Lily, an outdoor enthusiast. As a social sciences and humanities librarian at the University of Maine, she engages in a wide range of outreach, instruction, consultation, and research. She has published with Lily Herakova in the Association of College and Research Libraries 2019 Conference Proceedings, Basic Communication Course Annal, and Journal of Academic Librarianship. Lily Herakova is a mother, teacher, immigrant, baker, writer, and community organizer. She is an assistant professor and graduate teaching coordinator in the Department of Communication and Journalism at the University of Maine. Her work focuses on communication's potential to bring about equitable, just, and inclusive worlds and communities, especially in educational and health-related context. She has published and presented nationally and internationally in the areas of communication pedagogy and mentoring, performance, social justice, and health communication. And with that, I'd like to welcome Jen and Lily and turn the presentation over to them.
Thanks, Amy and Erin. So welcome everyone to what we call our workshop on setting the stage for civic-minded education, collaborative approaches to instruction. As Amy said, I am Jen Bonnet, Social Sciences and Humanities Librarian at the University of Maine.
And I am Lily Herakova, Assistant Professor and Teaching Coordinator in Communication and Journalism at the University of Maine. You can think of us as the set designers, the people who usually remain behind the scenes and only get to share their craft in the bonus features of a DVD. So welcome to our and your bonus features.
So our plan today is to present one approach to incorporating information literacy into a large enrollment public speaking course that we hope you find interesting and useful. And specifically, we'll discuss an approach that integrates information literacy into a civically minded curriculum, where it's hoped that students build their civic inclinations throughout the semester. We'll share ways we've been studying student learning in this context, as well as how we've begun to put our findings into practice. We'll also discuss some of the limitations and seek your input on ways to move forward. Overall, we hope that this talk illustrates ways in which librarians and faculty can seek out and engage in partnerships that spur meaningful teaching, research, and assessment. So for our collaboration, one of the first things we asked ourselves when we began building this set, to go back to our stage metaphor, was about what its theme and purpose were. So we wondered together, what should students learn in a public speaking course? And so we put it to you. What comes to mind for you when you think of things students should learn, take away, or gain from a public speaking course? So if you could, we'd love to get your feedback on menti.com, and on the slide there, you can see that if you go to menti.com, menti.com, and enter that 6-digit code, you can let us know your thoughts on what people should learn. And if there are those of you on the phone, maybe you could think about how you might answer this question and see if your ideas resonate with what others share. I'm going to go out.
And the code again is 712283.
Yes. And so if you go to menti.com and enter that code, it's at the top of the screen here. You can see there's a little person here on the bottom, person icon, and a 0. So we haven't heard from the new one yet, but we'd love, once that number starts rising, we can talk about some of the things that you include. I see one person has responded. Maybe we'll wait until we get 3 or 4. Oh, good. So people are saying things like students should learn rhetorical techniques, how to cite sources, how to assess their source, access sources, how to deal with anxiety. We see confidence issues come up a lot. How to support their arguments and actually maybe do that through research. They should learn about maybe their own vulnerability, what vulnerability looks like and feels like, and that is part of the process. How to make an argument.
There is also presenting information, ethics, confidence pops up again.
Yeah, and so you can see that a lot of you are talking about affect and behavior and things that aren't necessarily presentation skills, which I think is a default learning outcome that people assume with a public speaking course, but there is much more to what we expect students to learn.
Should we wait a little longer?
I think you can take it away.
Okay, so some of the things that you have mentioned, there are also common expectations that students bring to the classes we interact with. So you can see that there is a lot more that a public speaking course can do than teach presentational skills. So some of the things that have mattered for us are information literacy and civic inclinations. This led us to think about ways to collaborate to teach public speaking and information literacy, and how we address those bigger learning outcomes that a public speaking course can deliver or work towards. As your answer suggested, and we have noticed that learning in the public speaking course includes way more competencies than the ability to deliver content. When we first began thinking about more mindfully integrating such competencies, specifically around information literacy, we looked at connecting points. We had an idea of what the stage should look like, a space that emphasizes the critical appraisal and use of information to participate in civic society. So as we began designing this stage, we first took stock of what was in our inventory. And you can see on this slide that we looked at the National Communication Association's Outcomes in Communication and the ACRL framework for information literacy. We found some strong and shared building blocks that were perhaps shaded a bit differently between the two organizations. What we saw is that both the NCA learning outcomes and the ACRL framework emphasized ethical and contextually appropriate communicative behaviors. And some of you had mentioned communication ethics in your responses to the Menti as well. Both recognize that message production and information are complex, ongoing, and contextual processes that have consequences. So again, issues about information presentation and creation, but also how they impact beyond the moment of delivery. And also both frameworks come from a social constructivist lens, acknowledging the role and importance of authorship. We also noticed that these connecting points coalesce around a broad understanding of civic mindedness, emphasizing both of our disciplines' roles in civic society. After we explored what was in our inventory, we had to consider the theater where the stage was going up and adapt to that context. So as a reminder, we wanted a stage that emphasizes the critical appraisal and use of information to participate in civic society. The context for us, or the theater, was the public speaking course at the University of Maine, and you can see some information about it on this slide. It is a large enrollment general education course that enrolls more than 400 students each semester. It's required for a number of different majors, and majority of students who take it do so in their first semester or their first year. Because the title of our talk is Setting the Stage for Civic-Minded Education, and because this was an important goal of our collaboration, we want to give a bit more background on the civic-minded piece. First, a core component of the course is that students investigate issues of importance in their communities. They then present information case briefs about the particular issue and facilitate civil dialogues within the class. As you should be able to note from this, students are required to both work with work with and to create complex information, presented in understandable and accurate ways. This is where information literacy clearly comes in. So it might be easy to see the need for integrating information literacy into public speaking education with a civic focus. However, to us, the other side of staging was equally important. So we wanted to integrate civic learning in information literacy education within the public speaking course. And we did that around the three inventory pieces I discussed earlier, as shared between the ACRL framework for information literacy and the NCA's learning outcomes in communication. And these were ethics, authorship, and process. Thus, with regards to developing information literacy instruction in the public speaking course, civic-minded curriculum shows up firstly in the content examples we've chosen, such as the effects of climate change on skiing in Maine or the Take a Knee controversy. Second, we have infused civic-mindedness as a process. Unlike some other public speaking courses, ours does not emphasize quantity of speeches completed. We have only 3 major speeches in the course of the semester, allowing students to experience the process of speech preparation, including research and organization of information, as a mode of civic participation. This process involves thorough vetting of information on part of both students and instructors. Furthermore, the speech preparation process asks students to be accountable to their positions as people finding and sharing information. So not only do they have to be mindful about authorship in the sources they access, they also have to reflect on their own impact and responsibility as authors. The course curriculum was built with this vision in mind, a vision that integrated public speaking, information literacy, and civic-mindedness. But in exploring the theater for our stage, we also found that we actually needed to understand better if this vision is being realized and how. So we embarked on a research project, and you can see the focus of our research on the slide. We wanted to explore the relationship between public speaking, civic-mindedness, and information literacy learning within the particular course we were working with.
And so we developed a research sequence to consider how we might better understand the student learning. We'll start by talking about this research and then later about the practical applications that grew from our findings. So during the 2017-2018 academic year, at the beginning of each semester, we surveyed students on their self-reported attitudes and efficacies regarding information literacy, civic-mindedness, and public speaking. In the middle of the semester, we assessed students' information literacy skills in a couple of different socially relevant scenarios that tested students' application of information literacy. This is in addition to the efficacies gauged earlier in the semester. The IL Skills Quiz 1 is the pretest that they took in their class prior to information literacy instruction. The IL Skills Quiz 2 is the post-test that they took either in the library or in their class directly after information literacy instruction. And at the end of the semester, we surveyed students once more on their self-reported attitudes and efficacies regarding information literacy, civic-mindedness, and public speaking. And what you'll hear us use going forward when we refer to the beginning and end of semester surveys is that we'll call them global surveys.
So what did we find? The slide displays the mean scores of students on their self-assessment measures of information literacy, efficacy, and civic attitude. So these are the global measures that Jen just talked about. We used the t-test to see if the difference in scores from the beginning and end of the semester were significant. The civic attitude scale that we used, which has been validated before, has 4 dimensions or subscales which are listed on this slide. There are civic action, interpersonal and problem-solving skills, political awareness, and diversity attitudes. What you can see here is that for almost all variables, student self-assessment scores increased, and this increase was statistically significant. So for example, at the beginning of the semester, the mean student score on information literacy self-efficacy was 28.85, and that grew to 31.14 at the end of the semester. The only exception is the diversity attitude subscale of the civic attitudes measure, where there was no significant difference between beginning and end of semester scores. Similarly to this significant increase in information literacy, self-efficacy, and civic attitudes, we saw an increase in students' assessment of their public speaking competencies, as we'll see on the next slide. The public speaking measure we used had 3 dimensions, and they are all listed here: public speaking knowledge, public speaking motivation, and public speaking skills. Each one of those showed significant growth over the course of the semester. And we were pleased to see that students seem to report that they are learning and becoming more confident over the course of the semester in all 3 of the integrated areas we were interested in: information literacy, civic attitudes, and public speaking. Statistical tests showed that the increases in mean scores were significant. However, looking at the means, we wondered if a 1-point or a 3-point or even a 10-point difference was meaningful. We noted, for example, that student self-assessments were above average to begin with. We'll return to this later, but for now, let me just say that this led us to consider how we are actually assessing learning and what might be alternative assessment approaches.
Something we had planned from the beginning was to consider the differences between self-efficacies and skills. So in the middle of the semester, we moved from self-assessments to measurements of IL skills, information literacy skills. We put students in 3 groups that differed by instruction method, and we were specifically interested in learning if a particular instructional method made a difference in students' information literacy learning, and if it mattered who taught the lesson. So 2 of the 3 groups were led by a librarian and were presented with a different active learning exercise situated in contemporary social issues like climate change or public health. And then there was 1 quasi-control group that had a research lesson led by the course instructor without librarian input. So that lesson plan was up to them. We've reported in depth on this in a publication that we can share if anyone's interested. But the gist is students in all 3 groups made statistically significant gains in information literacy learning, meaning that students learned in every situation, but further analysis showed additional significant gains in scores in the 2 groups that received librarian-led instruction above and beyond those led by course instructors, which we suggest speaks to the value that librarians can bring to a collaboration like this one. Then we dug deeper to look at predictive relationships among our variables, and we were both excited by and confounded by our results. So the civic mindedness table is on the left. And when it comes to civic mindedness and information literacy, so looking at whether or not information literacy measures predict civic attitudes, it's a mixed bag. One could argue that there was a marginally significant predictive relationship between information literacy, self-efficacy, and civic action at a p-value of 0.059, and that's the relationship between attitudes around information literacy competencies and attitudes around civic engagement. We found that information literacy self-efficacy was a significant predictor of interpersonal and problem-solving skills and political awareness, suggesting that the more confident students feel about their information literacy abilities, the more self-assured and motivated they feel in their civic inclinations. However, when we looked at whether or not growth in information literacy skills, as opposed to efficacies, predicted growth in civic inclinations, there was no predictive relationship. The lack of predictive relationship raises questions for Lily and me about whether behaviors are necessarily reflective of attitudes. We only measured civic attitudes or intentions, not actual behaviors. So in the future, one option is to include different scenarios in the civic attitudes test to make this a more apple-to-apple comparison, given that we did see that the scenario-based information literacy skills information made a difference on its own. And so maybe it's possible that a similar application regarding civic skills would be an appropriate comparison. This lack of predictive relationship also makes us wonder if assessing traits will even change by intervention, which is a much bigger, muddier question. So if civic attitudes or traits, which one of our co-authors on a recent paper who's in psychological neuroscience suggests, then we need to consider that if these traits are immutable or if it's harder to observe shifts in attitudes, are there additional approaches to assessing civic inclinations that we could explore? Lastly, and Lily mentioned this earlier, scores were already above average in the pretest, and there wasn't a large change in the post-test, even though they were significant. So it's hard to expect influential predictive change if there's not much room for change. So these are some of the questions we're grappling with moving forward when we think about the civic mindedness piece.
And the other table on this slide on the right side shows the results of the linear regression between information literacy, self-efficacy, skills, and public speaking. Those were similar to the results around civic engagement attitudes. First, we wanted to see if growth in self-assessed information literacy efficacy would predict an increase in one's confidence in their skills, knowledge, and motivation for public speaking. We found that information literacy self-efficacy indeed does predict improved confidence in public speaking skills and knowledge, but the relationship was not really significant for public speaking motivation. Still, these results speak to the importance of developing learning that grows students' sense of efficacy around information literacy. The results suggest that doing so also would improve students' confidence in public speaking, which, as some of you mentioned in the Menti, is an important effective outcome of the public speaking courses. We also wanted to know if actual information literacy skills can predict growth in public speaking competencies. As with the civic attitudes measures, there was no predictive relationship between information literacy skills and self-assessed public speaking competencies. As Jen talked about earlier, this might be due to the fact that we were using a behavior-based measure to predict changes in an attitude-based one. Furthermore, our information literacy skills measures focus specifically on research skills, as these are key to the public speaking curriculum. But it is possible that a different set of skills, for example, around authorship, may have a different relationship to public speaking attitudes and performance. In sum, our research did not show predictive relationships between information literacy skills and civic attitudes, nor between information literacy skills and public speaking competencies. However, we were hopeful to see predictive relationship between self-assessed information literacy efficacy and confidences in both civic mindedness and public speaking. That said, since we conducted this study, we looked at the information literacy measure we created and think it needs further refinement as well. So as a whole, what did we learn about the stage we wanted to build? Well, the first lesson is that the stage is better when we collaborate in terms of teaching and assessing the various types of learning taking place in the public speaking course. Together, we were able to see connections and gaps in our understanding of what information literacy, civic engagement, and public speaking competencies entail. Engaging such connections, we think it's important to integrate information literacy into civically minded public speaking curricula, and we have seen gains. So we want to work on what that means and how to best assess it. Our second lesson focuses on this question of assessment, which is a work in progress. As a result of our research findings, and we alluded to this earlier, we began to look more closely at how we measure information literacy, self-efficacy, and skills, both short and long term. And we think we need a better and more refined set of measures. The ones we used, we adapted for our specific curricular context. And while these types of assessments made sense to us at the time and gave us some insights into student learning, Megan Oakleaf suggests that information literacy, particularly within the ACRL framework, would benefit from qualitative approaches to understanding the meanings and practices of information literacy within various contexts. So this is something for us to think more and think more deeply about. Lastly, and this connects to the earlier lesson of collaboration, we think that the role of the librarian is important in curriculum design. We advocate for integrating librarians and their knowledge throughout the course planning, teaching, and assessment, rather than turning to librarians as a snap-on resource. And for the next few minutes, we'll focus on how we have collaborated on instruction broadly defined. So in terms of instructional design and preparation, we have collaborated on several different learning materials and trainings, making sure information literacy learning is intentionally integrated in the course rather than an afterthought or a one-shot instruction. One of the first things we did was to develop a custom workbook. You can see the cover of it on this website, which has now been revised twice. This was a collaboration among public speaking instructors, Jen and myself, The workbook begins with a tips section, and tips stands for timely ideas in public speaking. That section includes an overview of foundational principles of information literacy, and these are then carried through in the other sections of the workbook, which contain worksheets for specific speech assignments. Information literacy topics that are present in these worksheets are around research as part of topic selection, as well as accessing, assessing, and organizing information from a variety of sources. Because the workbook is a required learning material in the course, and because instructor turnover is very frequent, we also developed and implemented regular instructor trainings, both on how to use the workbook as a resource, but also more deeply on how to engage students with information literacy competencies throughout the semester. We do this as part of a fall orientation and also in weekly instructor meetings. During these meetings, we develop, present, and try out specific lesson plans that educators can use in the classroom. For example, we have developed lesson plans on using social media for topic selection and on developing annotated bibliographies. Drawing on the public speaking and civic engagement context, most of these lesson plans also include a performance element, which allows students to experience and apply information literacy in a more active way.
Using backward design and curriculum planning, we've collaboratively created formative assessments as well, including an interactive guide that provides low-stakes, ungraded learning assessments for students, which you'll experience in a moment. And then we've also developed short Kahoot quizzes that instructors use in their classrooms to reinforce information literacy learning after students have engaged with the guide, which we also call an online module that they can work through, and before they meet with me for a research workshop. Lily and I have also co-authored papers and created presentations like this one at both communication and library conferences, where we've gotten interesting, rich feedback about our collaboration. And we're usually together side by side as a team, so we definitely missed that today. But we'd like to now look at one of the ways that we've put our collaboration into practice and look at that with you. And so this is part of the guide or online module I just mentioned, and it's one approach to our integration of public speaking and information literacy. We created this for all sections of the course to use at different points in the semester, but it's primarily used when students are researching topics for their speeches. Lily is putting the link in the chat window for all of you. And for those on the phone, we'll share it with the webinar organizers to send to participants. Or once you do have an internet connection, you can Google CMJ 103 Live Guide, and it should come up. So again, this is a guide we've prepared and have been using in all sections of the public speaking course the past 2 years. And it's been updated regularly based on instructor and student feedback. And we'd like your participation in assessing it and experiencing it, if you will spend a few minutes with us here. So what we'd like you to do is take a look at one of the pages on this guide and consider what are ways that the page you're reviewing supports information literacy learning. What do you think is missing or could be improved? And you'll see on this slide that we've broken folks out by last name. So if your last name begins with A through D, you could look at research as a process, that page. If your last name begins with E through H, you'd look at information life cycle. If your last name begins with I through M, you'd look at search strategies. And if your last name begins with N through Z, you'd review evaluating sources. And so what we'll do is give you just a few minutes to spend time on that page. Think about what you think works and what could be improved, and then we'll circle back in a few. We'll take one more minute and then we'll check back in with everyone. Okay, hi everybody, we're back. So we thought what we do, and please bear with us, this is the first time we've done this activity over Zoom, and we thought we'd check in with the first group of people who were looking at research as a process. I'm just gonna open up my chat so I can see here too. But would anyone feel comfortable sharing kind of your reactions or thoughts about the research as a process page? What you think works and what you think could be improved. And I'm not sure what the organizers think, if we should just do that through chat or if we should have people unmute.
Okay, everyone can see, except some people are on the phone, so I can read what comes up in the chat. Is that okay?
Great.
For people who are on the phone. Research as a process looks good. I would bold this sentence, quote, selecting your topic is an important part of the research process, not something that comes before you can begin researching. I might even put the first video at the top of the page. Thank you.
Yeah, that's great feedback. Sometimes we think, oh, we should write some stuff to contextualize, but maybe just jumping into a video and then highlighting the points of emphasis would be useful. So thanks, Adam.
And this is certainly the one thing we emphasize in class a lot and work with instructors, because most of our instructors for the course are graduate students, and their experience with research really has been shaped by kind of this paradigm. You have to figure out your topic before you begin researching, and not that it's a more iterative process. Comment is, I agree, there is a lot of text up front. Maybe cut down on the text to highlight the core concepts. Thank you for this suggestion.
Anything else from the research as a process group, either in chat or on the phone, or anyone want to unmute and share anything? Okay, so we'll jump to, and if folks have thoughts later, feel free to come back, but we'll jump to the information lifecycle page. And so do folks who looked at information lifecycle have thoughts about working with a page like this, especially if you think about the first year student experience and what works and what could be improved?
Hi, my name is Narcissa Haskins. I'm the teaching and learning librarian at LSU.
So great to hear a voice.
And so I really liked you all's information lifecycle page. In particular, the video, I thought that it was really fun. I work with a lot of undergraduate first and second year students. And so we don't have a video for when we talk about the information life cycle. We just have like an infographic, and we use that time to just have a discussion with the students that's relevant to some of the things that they have going on. So I talk about a lot of like social media topics that might have come up and ask them, you know, have any of those situations that have occurred, do you all think that would be in a scholarly journal article, for example? and just letting them know that the things that they talk about or are interested in are going to be in this journal article. So as far as the video, I think it's great. I do think that you all could turn I love what you all put in the tables down below, but I also think that you all could like make a really cool infographic with that information just for aesthetics. But the information is perfect to me, so.
Thank you, Narcissa. I think this would be also a great project for some of our upperclassmen to work on, just kind of visualizing that. And I also want to say that it's kind of interesting. I think this is something that maybe we would be returning to and rethinking a little bit in light of the context we are all living in right now, where academic scholarly information on COVID-19 becomes available much quicker than it usually does, and it's open access, for example, through PLOS One and so on. And there are quite a few comments in the chat. I don't know, Jen, if you want to take a few of those.
Sure, I think they mirror what Narcissa just said. And I think those are great ideas for rethinking the table format and making it more bite-sized and digestible. And I just want to speak to something Narcissa just said, because the video, most of the videos on this guide are just borrowed from other libraries and from other folks who put together these great materials. And I should say
have open access.
Yes, and the inspiration for this guide really goes to Montgomery County Community College, who created an introduction to research guide, and we borrowed that kind of format and layout and some of their ideas to build this guide for our context. So I just want to make sure that we're clear that we are borrowing and building on other ideas, and we're so grateful for that.
Yeah, and just want to say also that a lot of people are saying, great idea for the infographic, Narcissa, so thank you for that. And there is also a comment on the quiz at the end of this page, and quite a few of our pages have this self-assessment that Jen had mentioned before, and we find that they work really great. Another thing to kind of put things in context is that we work with instructors to train them to introduce this guide in class and kind of work with students on how they could use it. That is not an excuse for issues around accessibility that some of you pointed out. I don't know who did that, and I think that's really important, but it just gives a little bit of context, and students, specifically students in the classes, don't just encounter this on their own. And we think that's an important part of developing their information literacy skills, because they're working with the resource, and they're working with the resource sort of in real time with the instructors.
So I'm going to jump now to the next page, if that sounds good, to search strategies. So for those of you who looked at the search strategies page, thoughts or feedback on what worked, what could be improved if this hits the mark, or what might be missed?
Was there anyone who fell in that group? Because that's also a possibility.
So what we have here is an introduction to search strategies, and again, another borrowed video. And then we have an infographic on hacking Google, and then we explain some of the different strategies for using Google to navigate, which my librarian colleagues I know we're super familiar with. And then, like many of the other pages, as Lily mentioned, we have a test your knowledge option at the bottom, and it's a short, 2 or 3, 4 question ungraded quiz where you can respond to answer the questions, and then you get immediate feedback that we have created to further kind of emphasize key points depending on how people answered the questions. So I don't hear or see anyone chatting about this page. So I'll jump to the last one that we had people take a look at, which is evaluating sources. Any thoughts or feedback on what folks saw here? Feel free to put something in chat or to unmute and share your thoughts if anybody had a chance to look at this page. It's got another video at the top from NCSU about evaluating sources. It has some examples of the CRAP test, as well as ways to move, some thoughts to move beyond the CRAP test. I would have liked to see lateral emphasized at least as much or more than the CRAP test, but that could be personal preference. Thank you, Christina. That's great. And I agree. Lily and I have been talking about this page and thinking about ways to maybe condense and distill. And I know there are lots of other philosophies around evaluating sources. So thank you. Yes, that's something we're thinking about. And if people have particular approaches that you think we should take, please don't hesitate to share. And I see that Christina said more emphasis on lateral reading, at least as much or more than the practice. Great. Feel free to share more things if folks have ideas. We have some information here about bias, and that, because I think, and I don't know if others have this experience, students oftentimes want to dichotomize bias and say that, you know, one is bad, one is good. And so we try to talk to students about perspective, and that perspective isn't bad. We just need to understand what that means. Then we have information on peer-reviewed sources, because they're often asked to include at least one peer-reviewed source, but not all of them need to be peer-reviewed. And then we have a video around web domains, because we hear a lot from students about how, well, and which I'm sure is a familiar scenario, oh, well, I just use .org because it's flat out credible. So we have conversations around that, what that might mean. And then we have a test your knowledge at the bottom. And going through this with you right now, maybe this is a very long page too.
Yeah.
I see Narcissa is saying, pushing against privilege, act up for evaluating sources, and has shared a link. Thank you so much. And Christina says, I like the bias discussion as well as the rest of the info in this section, and I really like the knowledge tests on each page. Great, thank you. Any other thoughts from folks? I want to say that since Lily and I incorporated this guide into the course, and so this has been multiple semesters now, it gets used and revisited by students, and not just in this class. Other departments have ended up using pieces of this guide in their course. That I don't know about you all on the phone or on Zoom, but I usually don't get a ton of hits on my guides. You know, I'm lucky if I get 100 or a few hundred, and I get 5,000 to 7,000 hits on this guide. It's just bananas, and it's in large part because I think students come back to it. It's integrated and emphasized by instructors, and because it's been picked up and used in other departments as well. Oh yeah, to include Noble, yes, Sophia Noble and algorithms of oppression, algorithmic bias. Absolutely, that's a great idea.
Yeah, Jen and I have just been talking about that too quite a bit. And privilege is something that the course starts with, discussion of how privilege affects modes of public communication, and it kind of runs through the rest of the course as well. So I think that this would be a very welcome addition.
Yeah, and I like yeah. And I like Elizabeth Nelson's response too. We have one class using a lot of pathos, ethos, egos, logos. We talk a lot about that. Well, they do in class, and we talk about that when I'm with the students too. And that's another nice way to frame. And so thank you. That's something for us to consider for the guide as well. That's great. And I appreciate your simplistic version, and feel free to email us with more resources or things that you're doing. We'd love to know more about that. I like taking time to discuss domains, Elizabeth says, since so many students have heard that .com is bad, but most of our database results will show a .com address. Deborah says, I have a question about the student self-assessment. Do you define the terms for them when you ask how confident they feel? Do you define terms when you ask how confident?
Can you clarify what do you mean?
The student self-assessment.
In the assessment, in the student self-assessments, Deborah?
Deborah, are you asking on the guide, or are you asking in our studies? Thanks, Elizabeth. I like that you took time to discuss domains. Yeah, appreciate that. Sorry, in the studies. Okay.
So a lot of our measures for self-efficacy would ask things like, how easy do you find it to begin research on a topic, for example? So we don't define the research in that case. And there is a possible limitation in terms of respondents' interpretation with a lot of the self-reported measures. I think that would always be the case. And something that we have discussed also in what we're seeing in terms of the changes in scores or in the relationships is that as the semester goes on, as students develop a more complex understanding of some of the things we're asking them to assess, they might not assess their skills necessarily higher, but that's because they've learned that there are still things for them to learn. So confidence might have been higher at the beginning, for example, when they didn't understand what is all involved in research. I don't know, that kind of answers, Jen.
Yeah, well, and I think actually, yes, and that question leads me to, I'm just going to pop right back into the slides and we'll finish out and open up for this kind of discussion. That's an important question, I think. And it gets at some of the things that we've been grappling with, which is how best to assess student learning. And given that confidence showed up as something that was so important and showed so much growth, how might we further refine our measures? So I'm just going to pop right back into our slides and just go to the last one. And just summarize here, I'm going to come back to our stage metaphor. If we think about setting the stage for civic-minded collaborative instruction, Lily and I have 4 summary plot points that stood out to us. We design learning materials and research studies to assess student learning. We found that there's promise and efficacies predicting one another, so it's important to continue developing students' confidence in the 3 interrelated areas that we addressed: public speaking, information literacy, and civic inclinations. We did not find predictive relationships between information literacy skills, public speaking, and civic mindedness, which made us question how we're measuring skills and efficacy. And lastly, our work has been based on seeing opportunities to collaborate. So we're looking for new ways to extend this collaboration and assess student learning. And maybe some of you would take us up on that. So we'd like to spend the rest of the time, and Deborah kind of gave us a nice segue there, in an open discussion about anything that's come up for you. We welcome questions, comments, and ideas, as well as your own experiences or ways that you do this type of work, or ways that you might adapt this type of work in your own situation. So please, we'll give the floor back to everyone in attendance. Amy, did any questions come into you privately, or is everything that we've addressed in chat so far come through to everyone?
Yep, the only question I saw was about the articles studies mentioned, but that was addressed already.
Other questions or thoughts or ideas that folks have that you'd like to talk about or explore? I'm not hearing or seeing anything in chat. Amy, is there anything else that comes up for you or Erin that we should touch on or think through?
We have a comment. Really excellent session. Please share the recording. Thank you. Lots of great ideas in chat. Yeah, I have some closing remarks. So if people have questions, if you want to put those in the chat box while I go through some closing remarks, we'll see if anyone has anything else they want to ask about, if that's all right. So first off, I'd like to thank you all for joining us today, and I'd like to thank Jen and Lily for presenting for us. I hope everyone will take a few moments to complete our survey, which Erin put in the chat box, and let us know your thoughts about the presentation today and about our programming in general. As a reminder, the recording of this presentation will be available to PALA members early next week through the PALA website. If you are not a PALA member and you're interested in becoming a member, please feel free to reach out to myself or any of the committee members, and we'll be happy to get the appropriate person in contact with you. I also invite you to contact me or one of the committee members with your suggestions for future discussions and presentations, and I most definitely invite you to contact us if you'd like to present. So I see there's some things coming into the chat box here. Switch back over there. Someone said, yes, thank you. I'm letting this all marinate and look forward to taking a closer look at all the resources. I'm not sure chat is saved in the recording, but maybe. And yes, we can share the papers. Yes, we can share.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt, Amy. The host should have a saved file with the chat, so that would be perhaps the easiest way to just make sure that the links and the resources that people have shared are there to be shared with everyone. But.
Okay.
I can certainly do that.
Thanks, Erin.
Well, thank you all. This has been wonderful, and I look forward also to diving into some of the resources and ideas that you shared with us.
Same here. I think this was I'm very grateful for everything that you've shared. I think that it's been a very productive session for us as well. And it's refreshing to get direct feedback, to be honest with you, rather than kind of have to wade through and make those interpretations. So thank you.
Well, thank you.